A wonderful, warm welcome. Thank you all, dear participants, for enrolling in this session. And thank you, CII, for giving me the opportunity to run this session. I'm very grateful. Before we start on this session, I would like to point out a few things. The very first is that this is a one of its kind session. It has been not just the session, but even the entire program. It has been specially curated for CII. This program is not available anywhere else online. So if you find what we talk about today of value, if you find it interesting, if you think it will help you in making you a better business communicator, this is the place that you need to be logging in and doing it. Okay. The second thing I would also like to mention to you before we start with this session is the methodology that is going to be used in this online course. It's made up of 15 webinars, that is excluding the session that we are doing today. And each session will comprise of an interactive presentation, classwork, exercises, and it will close with 5 communications habits that you can incorporate into your daily communications. So the process followed is that you learn as you carry along, you do and you learn. So you don't just come in, log in, learn some wonderful things and forget about it, but you are able to apply them in your daily work as well. It's a fantastic mix. I'll be honest, I just loved putting this whole course together. It's a fantastic mix of different skills. We will not just be learning about communication skills, verbal and written, but also a lot of skills such as time management, intercultural communications, storytelling. Each session is unique. And the reason why it's such a super fantastic mix is because to be a good communicator, you need to hone all your other skills as well, and we'll learn about it as we carry along. So I'm going to start now with this introductory session, and the way that they carry on, I hope the rest of you were able to hear what I was talking about. I was basically going through the range of subject matter that we'll be looking at in this course, the methodology that we will use. And to come back to the session that we are now going to start, the way it's structured is that we'll be looking at the takeaways of each module. So you get an idea of the various subjects we're going to be covering in this course, but so that it doesn't become boring and just a whole bunch of takeaways, what I've done is that at the end of each module takeaway, I'll also be sharing with you a tip, a learning from that particular module, which you can apply instantly in your lives. So at the end of this session, you would have come out, I hope, richer with 15 tips, 15 learning skills. Okay, so here we go. We start. To start with, I'd like you to please rate yourselves, your communication skills on a scale of 1 to 10, and type it into the text chat window. And along with that, I want you to type in 1 strength and 1 weakness in terms of communications. And I'd like you to do it, please, in 1 sentence, okay, so that it's easier for me to read as we carry along. So rate yourselves, your communication skills, 1 strength and 1 weakness. So I'm giving you 2 minutes for this little exercise. Thank you for the inputs that are coming in. Thank you for being honest. As you can all see, there is always room to improve your communication skills. So what are we going to be looking at in the very, very first module is we're talking about communication skills per se, the larger picture, the bigger picture. Why are communication skills important? What is the communications process? There's a range of elements that go into the communications process, and we will be studying what are these various elements that go in. And when we communicate, what happens is that barriers creep in into each of those elements. So we'll also be looking at in this module, what are the elements that make up the communications process and how do we remove the barriers in each of these elements when communicating so that our communications is far more effective. And we are finally going to be looking at some common communication mistakes we all make when communicating. And trust me, we all do it. Even after being in the profession, outside the profession, no matter how many years you've been in it, we still make certain very common mistakes. We'll look at them so we become more mindful, become more aware of them, and are thus able not to carry out them. Now, I said, remember that we're going to be sharing one little tip, one little learning from each session. So the first tip I would like to share with you is tip number 1, respond versus react. Respond is equal to emotional intelligence. React is the equivalent of a lack of self-control. Yet how many times do we know that it's different. We know we should respond rather than react. But how often do we tend to react rather than respond? Here I would like to quote Dr. Travis Bradbury. He's the co-author of Emotional Intelligence 2.0. If you have the opportunity, this is one book you should try to lay your hands on and read. It's a fantastic book. And he defines emotional intelligence as your ability to recognize and understand emotions in yourself and others, and your ability to then use this awareness to manage your behavior and relationships. So, as a very first tip, everybody, please just become a little more mindful of the difference between the two, between responding and reacting. And the next time, choose respond rather than react. But in the session itself, we will be looking at how do you do that. The second module is going to be exploring communication models. Yes, there are models here too. Just like you have models in management, you also have models in communications, so that your communications becomes more persuasive, much more effective. We're going to be looking at Monroe's motivated sequence. We're going to be talking about the rhetorical triangle and how these models apply in your communication so you can be more effective. And then we're going to be also learning about the 7 C's of communications, or a communications checklist. So every time you communicate, you have a checklist that you can compare, use as a benchmark to make sure that all the 7 points are covered. Okay? Now, tip from this particular module, the rhetorical triangle. The rhetorical triangle is a fantastic model, and it claims that when you're communicating, there are 3 elements your communications needs to include, no matter what, okay? It's ethos, pathos, and logos. I know it sounds very fantastically intelligent. What it boils down to is ethos is the credibility and the authority of the writer, the speaker. Pathos is the appeal to the audience's emotions. Now, how do you appeal to an audience's emotions? You appeal to the emotion by connecting with their value systems and with their interests. But it's not just enough to connect to your audience's emotions. You also need to connect with their intelligence. And how do you do that? You do it with logic and facts. So therefore, when you're communicating, please make sure that all these 3 are covered. You connect with their emotions, you connect with their intelligence, and you also make sure that your credibility is maintained, okay, and it comes across. We now move on to what are the takeaways of the third module, storytelling. This is one of my favorite sessions. India as a nation, we're full of stories, whether it's our mythology, whether it's our traditions, there are loads and loads of stories. But it doesn't have to be limited to just mythology, just to culture, just to fun times. It can also be brought into business. So we'll be learning about how do you do business stories. When do you use stories in your business? You don't just use stories randomly. There have to be certain scenarios where you use stories. And then, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Is there a problem with the volume?
No.
Sorry, guys. So when do you use stories? What are the scenarios in which you use stories? And then we're going to be talking about the different types of stories. There are 6 types of stories. We'll be looking at each of those 6 types. And the script for a persuasive story. Yes, there is a script for a persuasive story. And once you have learned this script, you will notice that those that are very persuasive are usually sticking to this script. So what I want to share with you now as a little tip, as a little learning from storytelling is the CAR model. The CAR model says that every story is made up of 3 ingredients. These 3 ingredients are context, action, and result. Coming to CAR. The CAR framework was developed by Paul Smith. He wrote a book in 2012 called Lead with a Story, and he came up with this framework. Now, what the CAR framework says is that when you are saying a story, a business story, there need to be 3 elements. And first of all, there needs to be context. You have your main character. Who is the character? What does the character want to achieve? What came in the way of that? Where did it happen? When did it happen? So you need to set the context. And what tends to happen is that in a lot of our storytelling, we forget about the context. We are so excited about the other stuff, we tend to ignore it. Wrong. The context is key. After the context comes your action. The ups, the downs, the obstacles, the failures, the setbacks. You're sort of connecting with the emotion of the audience there, and they can feel what you have been through. Okay? And then how do you close your story? With the result as to what was finally achieved. Where are you now? And to hint, either subtly or very clearly, directly, the moral of the story. There has to be a purpose for business storytelling. Now, this is the traditional way of telling a workable story, context, action, result. But you can also switch it around and say, start off with the result, then go back like a flashback, action, and then context. But we'll be talking about that in more detail in the module itself. Listening and questioning. I'm sure you know that communications is not just about talking, writing, speaking. It is just as much listening and questioning. However, the listening and the questioning part tends to get sidelined a lot. When we describe ourselves as great communicators, we see ourselves as great talkers or great presenters or great writers. Have you ever asked yourself, am I a good listener? Am I able to ask all the right questions? Because those are as important for a good communicator as the other skills are. So in this module, in the 4th module, we'll talk about listening and questioning. We'll learn about what is mindful listening and how to listen mindfully. Okay? Now, questions. Did you know that there are lots of different types of questions? So we'll look at all the types of questions that exist and when to use which question. Yes, it's all very strategic, but that's how it works. Like you have models for written and verbal communications, you also have models for listening and questioning. Now, I'd like to share a little tip with you from this particular session, and that is the funnel question. So what is a funnel question? A funnel question is, as the name, as the word implies, you funnel. And it's a great type of question to use when you need to calm an angry customer. Now, we are all faced with angry customers at some points or the other, at times more often than others. And a great way to calm this particular situation is by using funnel questions. Because what happens is that when you use a funnel question, you zero into that one small change that you need to do to solve the problem. Okay, so that's what it does. It's zeroing in. And it also serves 2 other very key purposes. When you're asking these questions, this series of questions, funnel questions are always a series of questions. It distracts the angry customer from his or her emotions because they are busy focusing on what is the one thing they really want to get changed. And the second thing it achieves is that they are heard. And trust me, for an angry customer, being heard is all important. That is enough for them to feel that they have won something. So using funnel questions to calm an angry customer. And in the session, we'll look at more detail as how do you word your funnel questions. The fifth session is all about mails, memos, reports. We have to do it all the time, don't we? But how often do we really write any effective emails? Do you know that the inverted pyramid can be used when you're writing an email? And what is the structure of an inverted pyramid? And how do you incorporate it into your mail? And yes, there is email etiquette. There's a whole lot of do's and don'ts. What are these do's and don'ts? Okay. And memos and reports also have an internationally accepted format. We will learn about what are these formats, what goes in where. So it's a technical session, one would say, but one that is very practical and comes into our working lives all the time. Now, an email tip. I don't know how many of you use this tip. I've had to learn how to use this tip the hard way. You know, when you put in the recipient's email ID in the very beginning, and then you end up sending an email either without an attachment or an incomplete mail or a mail which is full of typos. It happens with all of us. So how do you solve this little problem? Which can become a very big problem, is by making sure that the email ID is typed in at the very, very end. Okay, make sure your email is first complete. Make sure that you have attached all the attachments you need to attach. Make sure that you have proofed your mail. That's when you have to put in the recipient's email ID, not before that. Okay. Session 6 is about English grammar. It was a long time ago we went to school, to standard 1, standard 2, standard 3. We learned about past tense and present tense and everything that went with it, the full stops, the commas. But somehow we've forgotten a lot of it down the road. So we're going to revisit English grammar. And in this one session, you're going to feel, oh, I know it all. But are you applying it? Okay. So we're going to talk about how do you write more concisely. When I say write more concisely, we tend to put in a lot of fluff into our writing. You use long, convoluted sentences, make it much more crisper. Revisiting English grammar, the use of articles, punctuation marks. How do you take ideas, turn them into paragraphs? Paragraphing is the whole art of linking your paragraphs so that your paragraphs flow into each other. We're going to talk about that. And inclusive language. And this is key. There are no men. I know it's International Women's Day and I'm honored and very happy to be sitting here doing this session with you. But a really inclusive society is one where we are all equal and we get full credit and merit for our skills. What is inclusive language is what we will be also studying. Sharing a little tip with you from this particular session, and it's one of my favorite tips, the M dash, the N dash, the hyphen, which each one of us gets completely wrong. The M dash is the long dash, and it is used to relay a break in thought. Okay, and how do you create an M dash? You basically type in 2 short dashes without a space before or after. It will automatically turn into a M dash. Then you have the N dash, and N dash is used to connect values in a range or those that are related. So for example, if you're saying from here to there, from this date to that date, that is when you use a N dash. How do you create an N dash? It's a single dash with a space before and after. So it's a little different from an M dash. An M dash is a double dash with no space before and after. And the hyphen, which is something we use for everything. We use it in place of an M dash. We use it in place of an N dash. A hyphen is used to join words in a compound construction. You know, when you're hyphenating your text, or let's say you have policy maker, policy dash hyphen maker, that's where it comes in, and it is a single dash. Now, I know this might seem like really overwhelming, you know, to put it all in one slide, but the reason I wanted to include this was to just bring to your attention that there are 3 different dashes which we tend to use or not use. And we use just the one hyphen for an M and an N. So that's the kind of technical stuff that we're going to be looking at in this session. That's how deep we're going to be going in. The 7th module is about data visualization. We are going to be exploring what are the different types of data visualization and when to use which kind of a chart and which graph. Infographics is all the rage nowadays. Everybody is using infographics. So we will understand infographics also in a lot more detail. And then we will look at some tips for good visualizations. Now here, as a learning, I want to share something with you, and that's called a cartogram. I don't know how many of you are familiar with a cartogram. A cartogram is basically a data visualization technique which is used to document geographic data. So when you have variables such as population, GDP, or GNP, and you want to illustrate it, so what you then do is that you substitute the land area or the distance for that particular value. Now, if you look at this map here, can you see India is almost bigger than, is that China in red? Yes, it's China in red, which is not really the case. But it's based on a particular mapping variable. You get software to create these kind of cartograms, but it's always good to know that these kind of cartograms do exist and they can be incorporated into your reports, into your visual material, which has that much more impact thereafter. 8th module is about networking and the elevator pitch. We all network, don't we? It's part of our daily work, weekly work. We need to keep meeting new people and meeting new people for a purpose, that it generates new business. We don't just meet new people for the sake of it. Now, when we talk about networking, what we're going to do in this module is look at business etiquette, and yes, there's also dining etiquette. So we'll study that. Body language, the do's and don'ts of body language. How do you sit? What do you do with your hands? How do you put your, this is all simple stuff, but very, very important stuff. And when you're communicating, as you all must be already aware, we don't just listen to a person, we are also reading their body. So how can you make sure that your body is giving out the right signals and the right messages? By becoming aware of body language. Networking is not just something that you do at an event. It also comprises what you do before the event and what do you do after the event. So we're going to look at that entire process. And lastly, we are going to be talking about the effective elevator pitch. I don't know how many of you are aware of what exactly is an elevator pitch, but an elevator pitch is basically how you would introduce yourself to somebody if all the time that you had to do it was a ride up in an elevator or a lift. That's how short, concise, and crisp it needs to be. Okay, and at this point, I want us to do a little exercise, and I hope you enjoy this exercise. It's a very popular exercise we do. It is on, yes, creating the elevator pitch. Now, when you, Bernard Marr is an author. He's also a keynote speaker and a business and data expert. He talks about elevator pitches, and what he suggests is that when you are introducing yourself, don't introduce yourself with what you do, but rather with who you help. Because communications, at the end of the day, what's your listener looking at? What's in it for me? That's the way the word works. So you need to model your introduction so that it meets that particular need. What's in it for them? So it would be, my name is so and so, and I help companies or I help organizations or I help the government, whoever you are helping, or whether it's individuals, and what are you helping them with? And this needs to be devoid of any jargon, any heavy language, any detail, just in one sentence. So what I would like you now to do is I'm going to give you around 5 minutes and give it a little thought about how would you draft your own elevator pitch. Hi, my name is, and I help whoever you do help with what. And I want you to key in your elevator pitches into the text chat window and give it some thought, okay? And your time now starts. And I want everyone to please take part in this exercise. Coming in, fantastic stuff over there. Please keep out the jargon, make it simple, really simple. Okay, remember, elevator pitch. You have 2 minutes to talk about yourselves. And the person that you're speaking to may not understand really heavy English or heavy technical stuff. So keep it to the point. And who do you help and what do you help with? You have 3 more minutes. Hello everybody, I'm back and I hope you also are all back. I hope you can all hear me clearly. And I trust that you enjoyed that little exercise and saw how simple it is to really introduce ourselves the right way, but how often we don't do it. Okay, now going on to the 9th session. In the 9th session, we're going to be talking about meetings and teleconferences. How often do we go into a meeting and it just goes on and on and on, and it puts a pause to everything else in our lives? How can you make sure that when you are running a meeting, it's objective driven? That's why we're having a meeting, right? Because you want to achieve something out of your meeting. So how can we do that? Teleconferences are all the rage now. How do you chair one? Putting together a workshop. How do you organize a successful workshop? So these are like checklists. Checklist for a successful workshop, checklist for a teleconference, checklist for a meeting, and a checklist for an agenda. What goes into preparing an agenda? And here I would like to share with you a little tip from this particular module, and that is agenda. How do you draft an agenda? How do you prepare an agenda? The very first thing you need to do is ask yourself that at the end of this particular meeting, what do I want to achieve? That's the first question you need to ask yourself. When you know that as to what you want to achieve at the end of the meeting, that defines the rest of what goes into your agenda. Everything else stems from there. So once you know what you want to achieve from the meeting, that's where you define then what are the topics you're going to be discussing. What are the kind of results you want to get? So what are you sort of slowly and strategically driving towards? Are you trying to convince them of something? Are you trying to win them over? Do you want to get a consensus? Are you looking for feedback? What kind of results will of course depend on what you want to get at the end of the meeting. Who or should you call into the meeting? How do you want to structure your topics? What comes first, second, third? How much time do you want to give to each topic? The date, the time, and the place. Now, what we tend to do is we go straight to topics or we go straight to participants that, okay, 5 लोगों को हमने meeting पे बुलाना है. But that's not an objective-driven meeting. If it needs to be an objective-driven meeting and you want to be productive, start off by asking yourself at the end of the meeting, what is it that I want the group to do? Okay? 10th, it's all about presentations, public speaking. A little checklist here, what goes into the presentation checklist. How do you use visuals in presentations? You know, if you really want a presentation to work, it needs to be full of visuals. So what kind of visuals should you use? And then this is a fantastic little topic that we're going to be looking at, presentation structures. Again, it's sort of linked to storytelling. How can you structure your presentation for maximum impact and the different kinds of structures that exist? And then we'll be talking about body language as well as some public speaking tips. So great module and super fun, okay? And here, a tip that I would like to share with you is just to say, you know, that, okay, we're not just learning skills, but we're also increasing our vocabulary and generally our knowledge about communications. A little term we're going to get familiar with here is glossophobia. Yes, a word like that does exist. And what it means is that it is the fear of public speaking. It actually is very common. And experts estimate that almost 75% of the global population has to some level or another have anxiety of glossophobia, have an anxiety of speaking in public. And here I want to share a little tip with you. And this is about Toastmasters. I don't know how many of you are active Toastmasters or have heard of them, but it's a community. And if you're interested in public speaking, I suggest you join this community. They have chapters all over India, big towns, small towns, suburbs, everywhere. And they help you to hone your public speaking skills with practice and peer reviews. We now come to our 11th module. The 11th module is about LinkedIn and blogging for business. How do you use LinkedIn for organizational growth? LinkedIn is also full of definitions and etiquette. We learn about those. And then we move on to blogging. Blogging is all the rage now. I myself am a blogger. I blog in my spare time. And what is the correct structure of a blog post? There is a structure to it. And how do you tell stories through a blog, including business stories through a blog? And when it comes to a tip, this is what I want to share with you. Now you're writing a blog, right? Writing a blog post. Okay, a blog is the bigger picture. Each particular entry is a blog post. You obviously are writing because you want to share your content. You want people to find the content and you want a search engine to pick up what you have written. It doesn't just happen automatically. There's research that's done which says that these are the things that Google likes. So if you follow these, there are more chances of your blog post coming up in a Google search. So Google likes text. So when you're writing a blog post, try and make sure it's between 1,000 to 1,500 words long. Google likes formatting, so please format it. Make sure there are headings, subheadings, captions, not just one block of text. Make paragraphs. Google likes freshness. That means original content. Google likes accessibility. If you're blogging or if you've ever gone into a blog, you would have seen that you have two options. You can have posts that are public for the world to see, or they are private where only a certain group of people can see it. If you want a search engine to be able to pick up your blog post, you need to make it public. Okay, accessibility. Outbound hyperlinks. You're connecting to other sites, to other blogs. If you do that, and don't go overboard, okay, be strategic in it. If you do that, there's a bigger chance of Google picking up your blog post. Google also likes you to tell where you are, okay, geographic location. And Google likes, I won't say Google likes, I would say Google loves experts. So try and become an expert in your subject and write about that area which you know the most about. So now we move on to module number 12, feedback. We're doing it all the time, isn't it? You need to give feedback to your colleagues. You need to give feedback to your supervisors. You need to give feedback to your juniors. You also have to receive feedback. How can you do it gracefully? How do you give and receive feedback gracefully? Social media. Oh, we get dashed up here, there, and everywhere. How do you handle it? How do you respond in a mature way? And here, we're also going to go, remember, it's also not just about the light stuff, but a lot of the heavy stuff as well. And we're going to be learning about two theories, the Losado ratio and the Broaden and build theory. These are two theories that exist, two frameworks, two models, which help us to become better in giving and receiving feedback. So we're going to be studying these two theories. And praise, why you should give praise and how do you give praise. And here we come to a little tip, giving praise. So when you leave this session and you go back to your workplace, try and give somebody a little bit of praise. But how do you do it? Don't do it in a vague manner. Don't say stuff like, oh, this is great, this is awesome, this is wonderful. That's too generic. It has no impact. Try and be more specific. And how do you give praise more specifically, in a more specific manner? It is by saying what you liked and how it helped you. This kind of praise grows, helps the other person to grow as well. And this is how your praise needs to be structured, okay? We come to number 13 module, and this is business relationships. Business relationships is also a kind of social relationships that exist. You need to talk to people when your workplaces. But there's still boundaries. There are still do's and don'ts. What you're going to be talking about here is small talk, how to build good relationships at work, how to be tactful. Yes, very, very important. How to read body language. Now, as a tip, what I want to share with you from this particular module is how important it is to choose your words carefully. You're having a difficult conversation. It could be a junior, a senior, a colleague. It could be anyone. And you're having a very difficult conversation. It's very tempting to go into the you mode. What I would suggest is you don't go into you mode, but go into I mode. Because when you use the you mode, it reads as blame. You're blaming the other person. However, when you go into I mode, you're taking responsibility. For example, if you were to tell somebody your report was badly structured, it hurts, right? If somebody was to say that to you. But if somebody instead was to tell you, I felt the report could have been structured differently, you would be so much more positive and accepting of this kind of feedback. So choose your words carefully and try as much as possible to structure your feedback using the I word and expressing what you feel rather than using the you word, because the you word tends to have blame connotations to it. 14, time management. Yes, we are even going to learn about time management in this particular course, because to be a good communicator, you need to have time to be a good communicator. So you need to be able to manage your time for that. So we're going to be talking about some common time management mistakes. We get distracted by Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. You know, it's very, very distracting. A lot of companies are smart. They just block all social media. But let's say your company is not that smart and they haven't blocked it. Then how do you make sure you're not being distracted? It's also easy to be distracted by colleagues in and out, phone calls, emails. How do you minimize distractions? How do you file your emails and documents efficiently so it's easier for you to respond, communicate better? And we're going to be learning about two techniques, activity logs and to-do lists. I know we've all heard about them, but how do you use a to-do list and how do you use an activity log so that you can become much better communicators? At the end of that, remember, our target is to become a better communicator. And if we're able to manage our time, use it more productively, we're able to communicate much more effectively. Now, here, sharing a learning with you from this particular session is the 2-minute rule. And the 2-minute rule was conceived by a gentleman by the name of David Allen. I suggest if you have a chance, do Google him. If you can get your hands on his book, please read it. His book is called Getting Things Done. And what he shares in his book is that if you receive a mail and if it takes only 2 minutes to read it and reply to it, do it immediately, even if it's low priority. But however, if it takes more than 2 minutes to read it and reply, put it aside and schedule it for later in your to-do list. And that way you're able to get put it on the side for when you can pay more attention to it, give it the attention that it deserves, but how it's low priority, get it straight out of the way. So you don't have small stuff pending. Try and get the small stuff out of the way as you carry along. Okay, so try using the 2-minute rule. I would say today's Wednesday. Try using the 2-minute rule tomorrow and see whether it works for you. And we now come to the last module in our course, which is going to be about intercultural communications. And in today's business, we are communicating with people from all over the world, whether it's Europe, or America, or Africa, or Australia, or China. We were communicating with them all the time. And we cannot use the same model with all of them. It doesn't work that way. So there's also a lot of risk associated with cross-culture communications because culture is such a big part of how each one of us communicates. So we're going to look at what is risky about cross-culture communications. Why is it risky? And how can you get around it by understanding the nuances of it better? We'll learn how to introduce ourselves around the word. We'll also look at Hofstede's model. We'll study the customs and beliefs that each culture has in it and what we need to understand so that we can understand the people better and communicate with them better. And we'll be looking at language and again certain phrases, how the Americans would read it differently, how the British would read it differently, how the Indians would read it differently to understand all this. And it's a great session and a lot of fun, like I said, but very, very practical at the same time. And I'm going to close this particular session with this particular tip here. It's from Erin Mayer, and she wrote an article, Getting to See Ja, We, Hi, and Da, in a December 2015 issue of a journal. And she did a lot of research on different societies and dividing them into emotionally expressive, unemotionally expressive, confrontational, and avoiding confrontations, and mapped different societies. And I want to share this chart with you, this graph with you, just so you can see that we don't have a one-size-fits-all. We are all different, and you need to therefore keep that in mind when communicating with them so that you can understand them better. I hope you enjoyed. With this, we come to the end of this particular introductory session. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the tips that I've shared, the learnings that we have explored. You felt that it was of value to you. And I look forward to lots of you joining me in this course where we build our capacity in communications. As you can see, communications is not one, it's not a flat page. It's multi-dimensional. There are so many angles to it. And that's what this course tries to explore and achieve, at looking at all these dimensions and how we can hone them so we can become better communicators. And with this, dear everyone, I end my introductory session. Thank you for your time.